Every single year, it seems like there's a handful of players who just go above and beyond their fantasy football expectations in a year and really become league winners and players that almost can single-handedly win you a fantasy championship on their own. For this video, I've found 3 players who I believe could be fantasy football league winners for the 2021 NFL season. So let's get right into the video. So the first league winner that I really want to start with is a player that I have been scooping up a lot in best ball and in redraft leagues. This player is super underrated in my opinion, especially given the elite production that we've already seen from him. And I want to talk to you guys about Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver Diontae Johnson. Last year, there were only 7 wide receivers who had 140 or more targets, and that was Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, Davante Adams, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, and Diontae Johnson. 4 of those 7 wide receivers are currently being drafted as top 5 options at the position, and every single one of those wide receivers are currently being drafted inside the top 12 wide receivers as wide receiver 1s, except for Diontae Johnson. Johnson is currently being taken as the wide receiver 17 in redraft ADP, going all the way at the back of the 4th round, which I think is absolutely ludicrous. As mentioned, Diontae Johnson had 144 targets last year, and of the 15 games that he played, he had double-digit targets in 10 of those 15 games. And with that volume, not only did Johnson give you a very high floor on a weekly basis, with only 4 games finishing outside the top 36 at the wide receiver position, but he also has an extremely high ceiling as well, with games like 8 for 92 in 1, 9 for 80 in 2, 6 for 116 in 1, 12 for 111, and with 7 games inside the top 13 at wide receiver, which was 3rd among all wide receivers in 2021, behind only Davante Adams and DeAndre Hopkins, and tied with Tyreek Hill. And not to mention the fact that his 2020 could have been a lot better, because while I said that he played in 15 games, he really only played in 13 after leaving early against Houston with a concussion, and then the next week leaving early against the Philadelphia Eagles with a back injury, playing only a combined 28 snaps over those 2 games. So if you take those 2 games out, his 16 game pace over his 13 games was actually 174 targets, 107 receptions, 1,150 yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. Not to mention the fact that his regular 2020 stat line was almost identical to Keenan Allen's, with the only difference really being 12 receptions and 1 touchdown, which made Keenan Allen a top 12 wide receiver and Diontae Johnson last year the wide receiver 21. And as much as everybody loves Chase Claypool as a big breakout in his sophomore year in 2021, loves Najee Harris as a fantasy RB1 in his rookie year, Big Ben's arm, everybody's saying, is turning into dust. I get all that, but Diontae Johnson has a unique combination, in my opinion, of talent and opportunity to have a monster 2021 NFL season, and could very much and very easily almost be this year's Calvin Ridley. The second league winner that I want to highlight is Detroit Lions tight end TJ Hockenson, and it is wild to me that TJ Hockenson is currently being valued as the tight end 6 as a fringe top 5 tight end, going in the mid-5th round, right behind Mark Andrews in redraft leagues. That is absolutely wild to me, because in my opinion, he's one of only a couple tight ends who have a legitimate chance to lead their team in targets, receptions, receiving touchdowns, yards, all of that stuff for 2021. And last year, TJ Hockenson actually was 2nd on his team in targets with 101, which was also 5th among tight ends, and behind only Marvin Jones on his own team, who is now gone. Speaking of receivers who are now gone from the Detroit Lions, Detroit leads the league in vacated targets with 360 targets gone. 360 targets gone. That is almost 65% of the team's target share from last year, and over 100 more vacated targets than the next leading team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, in 2nd place. All the Lions did, though, however, to replace all of those targets that they lost from Marvin Jones, Kenny Golladay, Danny Amendola, all of those players, all they did was replace those players with Tyrell Williams, Khalif Raymond, a day 3 rookie wide receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown. So he has 0 competition for targets on this offense. And you might say, well, Addison, they traded away Matthew Stafford. They have Jared Goff now. He sucks. He's obviously a major downgrade from Matthew Stafford. And while I agree that Jared Goff is definitely not as good of a quarterback as Matthew Stafford, I really don't care. I don't care about who the quarterback is because not every elite fantasy tight end has Patrick Mahomes throwing them the ball. I mean, Darren Waller has Derek Carr at the quarterback position. George Kittle broke out in 2018 with a combination of Nick Mullins and CJ Beathard, and then followed that up with another elite fantasy season in 2019 with Jimmy Garoppolo. So I really don't care who the quarterback is as long as that quarterback is targeting TJ Hockenson. And let's not forget that Jared Goff has supported fantasy weapons in the past. I mean, Cooper Kupp was the wide receiver 4 in fantasy in 2019, and Robert Woods has been a borderline wide receiver 1 for 3 years in a row. So like I said, I mean, as long as Jared Goff is throwing the ball to TJ Hockenson, that is all I really care about and can ask for from TJ Hockenson and from Jared Goff as well. And I think that there is a realistic chance that TJ Hockenson has 130 or 140 targets even in 2021. And out of the 23 tight ends since 2000 who have reached 130 targets in a season, 17 of them averaged 15 or more fantasy points per game, and all but 3 of those 23 tight ends were top 3 fantasy tight ends in their respective seasons. So in my opinion, if Hawk is receiving that kind of volume, which I think is very possible and very, very realistic, I don't think there's really any possibility that he's not a top 3 tight end. And if that's the case, then he is a major steal in the 5th round as a fantastic tight end option as a weekly starter for your fantasy lineup, and could realistically be this year's Darren Waller. And the third and final player I want to highlight as a league winner for 2021 is Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts. And a lot of people are already on board with the possibility of an elite fantasy season from Jalen Hurts in 2021, especially given his rushing ability that he already showcased at the end of 2020. But with that being said, he is still being drafted as the QB 12 in redraft leagues, even behind Matthew Stafford and Ryan Tannehill right now, which I think is kind of crazy, but you know, ultimately I kind of understand as well, because there are a lot of question marks with Jalen Hurts' game for 2021. But in the 4 games that he played last year as a starter to close the 2020 season, Hurts finished the weeks as the QB 11, QB 1, QB 12, and then in his abysmal week 17 game where he had a 35% completion percentage, threw an interception, only had 70 passing yards, he was still the quarterback 20 on that week because of what he was doing on the ground. And his rushing production is largely what will make Jalen Hurts an elite fantasy quarterback in 2021, with any passing efficiency that he might have really just acting as a cherry on top of what he's already doing on the ground. In his 4 games last year started again, he averaged 11.5 rush attempts, 68 yards, and 0.8 touchdowns per game, which is a 16-game pace of 184 rush attempts, 1,100 total yards, and 12 rushing touchdowns on the ground. That is insane. That is like what 2019 Lamar Jackson was doing on the ground, and helped make him a league winner in that season as well. And that rushing volume not only gives you a safety net on a weekly basis, but also that huge elite weekly upside. Not to mention, if Hurts does improve at all as a passer last year, I mean, last year he only had a 52% completion percentage on 6.9 yards per attempt. Like, that's very, very, very bad. So if he were to improve on that at all, it would just make him even that much better for fantasy football. And the Eagles definitely made their offensive weapons a priority in the offseason. I mean, they went out and they drafted former Heisman Trophy winner Devonta Smith at the 10 slot in the first round. And then you also have Jalen Reagor. You give him a full offseason now. That's not COVID. You get him healthy. You get him ready for the season, a former first rounder himself. You also have Dallas Goedert still. Zach Ertz, whatever he can bring to the table to just catch passes and then fall down at the first down marker. Like, all of a sudden, this is a pretty decent offense that can help support Jalen Hurts as a passer. And like I said, to couple and pair with what he's already bringing to the table as a rusher. So while I don't think that we see some like crazy pass improvement like what we saw from Josh Allen last year, or like crazy passing efficiency from like what we saw from Lamar Jackson in 2019, while I don't necessarily see those two things happening, I do think that he does enough that vaults Jalen Hurts into the top 5 fantasy quarterbacks at the end of the 2021 season. Because like I said, any improvement in that passing game with the rushing upside that he brings will make him an elite fantasy option for 2021, and could realistically be this year's Kyler Murray. If you would like to see a video on my breakdown on the J.K. Dobbins injury and him missing the season for the entirety of 2021 and what that does for the effect for fantasy football, for Gus Edwards, all the other things like that, you can go click right up here and watch that video. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch y'all later.